Hello and welcome to IULM Flow Talk number 6, a series of online meetings focused on the global and international issues. Let me introduce today's guest, Dr. James.
Hello and welcome to IULM Flow Talk number 6.
Dr. Thurber is a university distinguished professor of government and founder and former director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies and affiliate distinguished professor of public administration and policy at American University in Washington, D.C. Among many awards and merits, he founded the Campaign Management Institute, the Public Affairs and Advocacy Institute, and annual European Public Affairs and Advocacy Institute in Brussels. Dr. Thurber has lectured at over 100 universities in the United States and in 40 countries around the world. So welcome to Professor Thurber, and with him, as in many of other IULM Flow talks, we have Professor Pierluigi Sacco. Dr. Sacco is a university distinguished professor of cultural economics at IULM University in Milan and senior researcher at Meta Lab at Harvard University in Boston, and visiting scholar at Harvard University at the same time. Dr. Sacco is the head of the Venice office of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and he held the position of special advisor of the European Commissioner for Education and Culture. So, welcome both of you, and I leave you the stage of this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roberto. It's really a special occasion. There's one having somebody as Jim Thurber as a presenter and a commentator on the event that everybody is thinking about currently right now, not only in the US, but in the whole world, the forthcoming American elections, something that is probably going to affect the future of the world for generations. So I am really particularly happy to give him the floor. First of all, to give us a general view of what we are, where we are, from the point of view of the election forecasting process at the moment. What are the scenarios? And then we will have a conversation nailing down specific points. Of course, there are quite a few, but probably also the audience will have some interesting questions to raise, and we will be happy to pick them up and submit them to Jim. Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pierluigi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you for this conversation. I'm going to give a short presentation about what to watch for in this election and what it means, with a focus on the candidates, the voters, the issues in this campaign, and the potential impact of the outcome of the campaign. I have a few slides. Let's go to the next slide, please. And as an overview and background of this election, I'd like to just focus on the fact that in the United States, obviously it's not a parliamentary system. We have a separation of powers in our elections, with House seats, Senate seats, and the presidential election that are very different. The House has 535 members. There are only 20 seats out of that amount, or 26 seats out of that amount, according to this account this morning, that are competitive in the House of Representatives. The Senate is more competitive. About 12 seats are competitive this time, mainly incumbent Republicans that seem to be in trouble. We have very different kinds of campaigns going on in the House and the Senate in this bicameral system. The real election for the House of Representatives is the primary election. Most of those seats are safe. That is not the case in the Senate. And our federal system, where the states and localities have a certain amount of power, is fundamentally important to understand in this election, because they administer elections and they have very different rules in each state. There are over 44 lawsuits going on with respect to access to the ballot and making it easy or not to vote. Most of those lawsuits are being pursued by the Republican Party to make it more difficult to vote. We have a great deal of money under our First Amendment rights. We can spend money as an expression of freedom of speech. This election, it looks like it'll be $11 billion spent in this election. About $7 billion were spent in the last election. Kiddingly, I say this is great because my students are all getting jobs in the campaigns because they have so much money. So I have a lot of students out there, former students in the campaigns. They're sort of my moles, my sources of information from time to time. The most important thing is the United States is highly polarized, and in many other democracies in the world they are too. But this polarization has created gridlock, and the Trump presidency has really reinforced the polarization through his populist arguments. Slide, please. The roots of this polarization are important to understand as a background before we get into what's going on in this election. Our voters are polarized and sorted. Sorting is a sociological phenomenon where people tend to agree with people that they live close to. Like in urban areas, it's highly democratic, and people there have their values and attitudes reinforced by their neighbors. And if you live in a rural area in the United States, in the so-called cowboy states like Wyoming and North and South Dakota and Nebraska, it's pretty conservative. And we have ideological sorting with people going to sources of information on social media where they agree with it. The few people that watch television go to places that they agree with also. Fox television is very conservative, and conservatives go there and they get their information from that source, and people who are pretty liberal, or liberal in the US sense, or progressive, go to MSNBC or CNN to get their information. We have also partisan redistricting. Every 10 years, we redistrict or redraw the lines in the House of Representatives to represent one person, one vote, equal populations in these districts. And when that happens, it's dominated by the political parties in the United States. They do the drawing of the lines in state legislatures. And I mention this because they've created a lot of safe districts in the United States for one party or the other. That's changing. 31 states have commissions that redistrict now, and there's more competition there. And finally, we have a realignment that's been going on since 1965. The South is Republican. In 65, we had a Voting Rights Act that allowed African Americans to vote more easily in the South everywhere. And when that happened, many Democrats left the Democratic Party, became Republicans. So we have the traditional South that was associated with the Civil War, and the cowboy states, not the states along the edge where the ocean is, on either on the east or the west. They're aligned with the Republican Party. This regional realignment is still going on, but it's beginning to change because of the nature of our population. Slide, please. So this polarization is reflected in the parties. The parties are really quite different when Democratic Party is aligned with minorities to a great extent, African Americans, Latinos, not all Latinos, and there's a racial divide between the parties. There's a cultural divide over lifestyles and values and gay marriage, guns between the two parties also. There's an ideological divide that's coming clearly out in this election, where Democrats and Republicans differ sharply on the wide range of issues, especially the proper role and size of government. One of the battles right now over COVID, our pandemic here and elsewhere in the world, is whether you should wear masks or not. And for some reason, the Republican Party thinks that this is too much of an intrusion on their freedom, the freedom of people, and so they are not really pushing it very hard. And the president is not pushing it very hard, and he's not wearing a mask at all, which is a symbol of this division ideologically between the parties. Biden, on the other hand, is wearing a mask. He says he will call for federal national standards on testing, on mask wearing, and tracing. This geographic divide that I mentioned before is still playing out in this election, with the South and the cowboy states versus the coastal populations, and urban, suburban, and rural areas are split also. Slide. The next slide will show you, slide please. The next slide will show you in 2018, and this is playing out in this election, urban areas in the United States, 98.8% voted Democratic, 70.4% in the suburban areas voted Democratic. This is a real problem for the Republicans, because the suburban areas are where the battle is going on right now, especially among women in suburban areas, and 70% voted Democratic, and only 19% voted Democratic in rural areas. That you'll see that this is the case now in this election. Slide. This is the best way to figure out the so-called battleground states. There are probably 6 to 8 battleground states. Look at 2016. They become the swing states of 2020, and you'll have these slides later. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every single line. You can look at it later and determine what's going on. Next slide. It takes 270 electoral college votes to win. Votes in the electoral college are equal to the 2 senators and the number of House members in a state. California has more than any other state. It's 2 senators plus 53 members of the House. That's 55 electoral college votes. It is not proportional representation as it is in other democracies. It is winner take all. If Biden wins by 1 vote in California, he gets all 55 electoral college votes, and that is the case in all but Nebraska and Maine. They have proportional representation in the electoral college. These show the current polling averages as of the 23rd. They're changing. If you watch the polls, it'll drive you a little nuts. You got to just relax and get the averages. These are the averages of what's going on in the battleground states. It takes 270 electoral college votes to win. The projection right now by several reputable sources, the Cook Report 538, which you can get online, is Biden has 290 electoral college votes. Trump has 163. That's pretty tough for Trump. He'll have to take all of the 85 toss-ups that are on the next slide, which you can refer to later. I'm not going to go through it in detail at this point. And he must take 85 toss-ups and 22 leaning Democratic districts in order to win. If you just take the states where Biden is ahead by 3 percentage points or more, and Trump is 3 percentage points or more, the current projection is 326 electoral college votes go for Biden and 163 for Trump. It's likely not to come out to that. It'll be closer. Next slide, please. The average, as of this morning, the average of the polls for Biden versus Trump is Biden's ahead in the United States by 9 percentage points. On October 22nd, it was 7.9% advantage for Biden. So he is continuing to go up. Now, a lot of people say, well, what about 2016 and all the errors that occurred in the surveys? Well, there's a projection by 538 in a variety of simulations that they're running. If the polls are wrong, as they were in 2016, if the margin of error is off in the same direction, Biden still wins 290 to Trump's 248. Next slide, please. The money in this campaign is very important. Money is the fuel for a campaign, for cable, for radio, digital, satellite, broadcast television. And you can see that Trump is not doing well compared to Biden in terms of bringing in the money as of the 14th of October. Biden's way ahead in terms of the amount of money and advertising advantage, as you can see in the box on the slide. Next slide. Joe is not Hillary. Everybody says, well, this is like 2016. Well, he's not Hillary. Hillary's favorables were very bad going into the election at this stage in the campaign. We are 6 days away from the election. Her favorables in the polls were 43%, unfavorables 53%. Joe Biden's is 50 favorable and 44 unfavorable. Next slide, please. If you look at also, this slide is a little busy. Let me just summarize it and say that Biden versus Trump are the blue bars. Trump wins with white men with no college, white women with no college, whites generally. He loses with all the other categories. If you look at that compared to the exit polls in 2016, Biden's doing much better than Hillary. She lost by 48% with white men, 27% with white women, no college. Biden's doing very well with college white women compared to Hillary. With women, surprisingly, he's doing better with women than Hillary did. Much better with white men with college degrees. And suburban voters, he's doing much better than Hillary did also, and with men generally. So Biden's ahead of Clinton with margins with most demographics, which is making a difference in this election. Next slide, please. If you look at the ground war, GOTV, get out the vote. It's very important in any election. Hillary moved out of Pennsylvania, moved out of Michigan, Wisconsin in the last election, and she lost barely in those states by 78,000 votes collectively among those three states. If you look at this as a measure of the ground war, Republicans have done very much better. They've registered new voters, twice as many in Florida, twice as many in Pennsylvania, almost twice as many in North Carolina, and it's about even in Arizona. Whether those people will turn out, and vote for Biden is another question. But it doesn't look good for the Democrats when you're so far behind in new voter registrations since March 2020. Let's go to the next slide. What are the issues in this campaign? And we can return to the candidates and the campaign specifically later during the Q&A, but what are the issues? The primary issue is the pandemic, COVID. And Biden's hitting that very hard. He's accusing the president of giving up, waving the white flag over the pandemic, especially considering his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, saying we can't control the pandemic. He did this last Sunday. The president has said that. Biden is pounding the president on that, and his leadership in dealing with the pandemic and the number of deaths and the spiking that's going on in the United States. The economy is always the most important issue. It is not the most important issue now. The president had a pretty good, he inherited a good economy. He kept the economy going until the pandemic came, and now the economy is really doing very, very poorly. He's trying to use the economy as his issue and saying that, well, if Biden gets in, he's going to ruin the economy. He's going to raise your taxes. It's become an issue for him, but he doesn't stay on message. In a campaign, you need to have a clear strategy, theme, and message. He moves around a lot. Biden doesn't move around a lot. He continues to focus on COVID, healthcare, race relations, and climate change. All of these in the polls are the most important issues in this campaign. Slide. Look at the measure, a little busy here, but let me just summarize. It's the approval of Trump's handling of the pandemic. Most people disagree with Trump. Most people, by high percentages, agree with Biden's lead over Trump on better handling the coronavirus is from 11% to 21% positive. He is getting better evaluations by the American public, by potential voters. Next slide, please. So what's the most important issues in deciding how to vote? If 30% say that it's the economy, this was on October 9th to 12th in a survey. And if the economy is the most important issue, the Republicans have a 13 percentage party advantage on all other issues except crime and violence. The Democrats lead on those issues. Crime and violence is an important issue for many, and the president is trying to say that he's the law enforcement president. The tragic shooting of another African American in Philadelphia yesterday is leading into that. It does have an effect, but remember, most people have made up their mind about who they're going to vote for probably 2 weeks ago. There's very few people that are independents and have not made up their mind, and most people have voted. So this is not just polls that are going on now in terms of projected Democrats versus Republicans, actually people who have voted. Slide. This is a change election. As you can see, out of the last 7 elections, they were change elections. What's a change election? Change election is where someone comes in and they're challenging the status quo, the incumbent. It's not a referendum on, it is a change election. Biden is the change candidate in 2020. 2018, it was a huge change election with 92 new members elected to the House of Representatives. 2010, in reaction to Obama's first 2 years, it was a very large change election with over 80 people from the Republican Party elected to the House of Representatives. Elections are about change, and this one is that, and I just wanted to reinforce that. Next slide, please. This, I will not summarize. It's for those of you that would like to know the positions of Biden and Trump on a variety of issues. Let me say that when it comes to Europe, the Biden administration will try to have better multilateral relationships with NATO, with trade agreements with Europe, and as you know, Trump administration has ended those old multilateral relationships or tried to reduce their power. We will sign the Paris Agreement if Biden is elected, and he will re-regulate to try to have better clean air, better OSHA rules, occupational safety and health rules, and a variety of other rules. Deregulation has been a major issue for the Trump administration, and on immigration, we'll have a total change in terms of the Biden administration versus the Trump administration. Slide. So this is the closing arguments of both campaigns. Biden says he's a choice. It's a change election. That Trump has made the pandemic worse. He's costing jobs. He's inciting violence and racial divisions. He's really deepening the crisis of global warming and the environment. He's dividing America, playing into this extreme partisanship and polarization. And of course, Trump is calling Biden a socialist in the United States. That is a dirty word, and that he's against capitalism. There's no evidence of that. That he's locking down America. Let's open it up. That Biden is not the law and order person, that these urban riots will continue if you have somebody like Biden. Let's go to the next slide, please. The Senate and House elections are up. Slide. The Senate has 36 seats that are up. 24 of those seats are Republicans. If the Senate changes net 3 senators, in other words, net, the Democrats have 3 more senators, plus the vice president who would break the tie, they would have a majority in the Senate. With 4, they have a clear majority. Slide. All of the seats, next slide. All of the seats that are toss-up races that are very close are Republicans. 2 in Georgia, Iowa, Maine, Montana, North Carolina, South Carolina. Some of them are changing. South Carolina with Graham is looking a little more solid for Graham. But if out of all of these, they win net 4 seats, they will have the majority. And that's very important, because if you have a Democrat in the House, the Senate and the House will be Democratic, they'll gain seats. And in the presidency, you have unified party government. When you have unified party government, you can get things done. When you have divided party government, it really continues the problem of gridlock and extreme polarization. Next slide. The Jones in Alabama is going to lose. He's much more progressive liberal than Alabama. He's way behind, 7% behind. Incumbent McSally in Arizona and Gardner in Colorado, they both are way behind. They will lose. So you have 1 Democrat losing, 2 Republicans losing. So you need, in the end, 3 more seats losing for the Democrats that have a clear majority. Slide. The House, this next slide, this just shows how close it is. Slide. Slide. The House of Representatives has 435 seats. There are only 6 that are competitive or toss-up for the Democrats. Slide. And there are 20 Republican toss-ups. So most of the money in these campaigns at this point is flowing into those 26 seats. Projections, even by the Republicans now, show that the Republicans will net lose about 10 seats in the House of Representatives. So the Democrats will gain even more. You need 218 votes in the Senate to govern. They'll have probably 230 seats. In the House, 230 seats in the House. They'll have a clear majority. Next slide. So in conclusion, many people are wondering, maybe we'll have this question, maybe I should wait, but they're wondering, well, how long will the vote count take? Will there be some questionable activities by the president during that period? Each state has different rules on counting. Some are already counting the votes that are coming in. Some are legally not allowed to count them when they come in. About only 8 states out of 50 states are expected to have 98% of the votes counted by noon the next day after the election. There are some states that will take several days. And those states are key. Michigan and Pennsylvania in particular will take several states. Just to put this in context, sometimes it takes weeks to get the official count on how people have voted. Some states have not had such an influx of mail-in ballots. Some have only got about 5% mail-in ballots in the past. They're up to 60%. They don't have the technology nor the personnel to count them. So this is going to be a problem. The president has been criticizing mail-in ballots. He doesn't say whether he'll accept the outcome of the election or not, which is absolutely unique in U.S. history. No presidential candidate has said that. So with that, let me open it up to Pierre Luigi. And I'm sorry, Pierre, I've taken a long time. I'm so data-driven that it takes a little time to get through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I think it was amazing. You gave us really a bird's eye view perspective on the main issues and topics, and that was crucial to, of course, to inform the discussion now. The first question just relates immediately to your last remarks. Isn't it peculiar that a country that is the beacon of digital technological innovation is so backwards as it comes to the technology to count votes? That should be something relatively trivial for a knowledge.
Yeah, this is a major
think?
problem in the United States. Some states, like the state of Washington, where I am now, it's all mail-in ballots. They're used to it. They've got the technology. They've invested the money, and they can do it very quickly. Oregon is the same way. They have all mail-in ballots. Other places, they don't have the money invested in it. It's, as I started the presentation, it's federalism. It's the power of the states to determine, even counties, to determine how much they spend, how many people are there, and how they do it. Yes, it seems that we would have, after the 2000 election and Gore versus Bush, there was a great deal of money invested in improving the way we vote. I served on a commission, the Carter-Baker Commission, that came up with a series of recommendations for investing in improving this. Some states picked it up. There was no federal funding. The Republicans basically objected to it, and so there was no funding. In the COVID bills, these bailout bills, these bills that have passed so far by the House and the Senate to deal with people, unemployment, the unemployed, the people in the healthcare sector, they had money for elections, but the Republicans objected to it. And so they cut that money in half, making it more difficult for states to upgrade and making it more difficult to count votes.
So let's imagine that we are at the election night and no clear response still is there. Let's say at dinner time. What are you think the scenarios from this point of view? What's the projected most likely possibilities in a moment in which?
Well, I think that what will happen is the president, in an unprecedented manner, as he has so many times, will jump in and say, well, this election, I've won the election. And even though it's not projected, and he will complain about the corruption of the election through these mail-out ballots, and he said he'll claim victory. But in the end, the states count this. In the end, the Electoral College electors are the ones who make the decision as to who won in those states, and that will take some time. I think that this may take as much as a week, maybe more, before we officially know who has won. There'll be a great deal of agony and discussion by academics and by the media about what went wrong and what we should do and who's won, who has not won. And so we'll have a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. And that's my projection, is that it will not, it won't be a pretty picture. But if Biden wins overwhelmingly, he will in the popular vote, as Hillary did, but in the Electoral College, and is projected to win overwhelmingly in the Electoral College, and there are many states that will count effectively and get it done. If he wins overwhelmingly there, it will change the whole tone of the discussion, and that indeed may happen, Pierre Luigi. We'll see.
But imagine that there is really a landslide result, but nevertheless, Trump says, well, but this is just projections. I don't believe in projections. I want real votes. I mean, it could be possible given his previous attitudes. What do you
Yeah, I think that he's likely to say something like that. I mean, he's breaking all the norms. There are no laws that say that he can't say that. He's breaking all the norms, and it will cause a lot of tension. And in fact, we've had a lot of violence in the United States on the far right, some on the far left, and some people are worried that if he loses, the far right will cause problems. I mean, we have a lot of guns in the United States. There are more guns in the United States than people in the United States. Okay, and people on the far right tend to have a lot of guns, and we've seen them come out in Portland, Oregon, in Seattle, in Wisconsin, coming into the state legislatures with them. And he has encouraged that, and he has not criticized people in Michigan that tried to kidnap and maybe kill the governor of Michigan. This is all crazy stuff compared to most norms in the United States. I am worried about that.
Really sounds like dystopic science fiction from the 60s. Huh? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It sounds like a very poor science fiction novel, but it does sound like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. But another worrying consequence could be on the stock markets. What would happen if there is a 1 week of uncertainty on the electoral result on the stock market?
Well, the stock market's a mystery to me as to what they take into account when they're investing and selling and buying. It cannot be good to have a question mark about the outcome of the election. Some people think that if Biden is elected, that the stock market will drop because he wants to raise taxes on unearned income, on capital gains from the sale of stock. And so therefore people will be selling a lot before Biden comes in and the taxes are there. If Trump is clearly elected, I think the stock market will continue to go the way it is going now. But uncertain, stock market doesn't like uncertainty. But some people say it's already built in, that they already have adjusted their investments before the election. We'll see. I'm sorry, Pierre, Luigi, it's a mystery what the kids on Wall Street do with their money.
I think to everybody, and if there is something very difficult to predict, is really how the stock market reacts to things. And by the way, also they don't seem even to incorporate, for example, the updates to previous, to previous announcements. When you have, for example, the check that the previous announcement was false, in some sense it doesn't compensate for this. So it's really a mystery, and the fact that there has at least a Nobel Prize has been won on the rational exuberance of the stock markets tells something from this point of view.
Right.
But to return to the beginning of your presentation, something that sounds surprising, for example, from the point of view of a European audience, is the idea that in the cradle of democracy, as America nevertheless still seems to be perceived by most, the fact that there could be some systematic attempt to block people from voting or to prevent people from voting, as you said at the beginning, really sounds weird. I mean, how is this tolerated in the American society?
Well, it is weird. I'm biased about this. I think that in a representative democracy, you should make it easy to vote, easy to register and easy to vote. And there's no evidence that we've had a lot of fraud and abuse by people in states where you can have day of election registration and where you make it easy to vote. It is really a battle between the parties. The Republican Party is making it more difficult to vote. I think they're very worried about the changing demographics in the United States. We are a representative democracy. We have new populations that are coming in, Latinos, Asian populations, African Americans, Caucasians are a minority compared to all the others in the United States, and they're very worried about that because it's a party that's appealing primarily to whites, white males. And so they, I think it's very short-term calculus on their part. They're making it more difficult to vote because they're worried that they'll get voted out down ticket as well as at the top of the ticket. Yes, and then we go around the world trying to help other nations have democracy, and we have we have observers through the Carter Center elsewhere of the elections. I think we need observers in the United States from Europe at this point, the way it's going.
That's an irony of history.
Yeah.
But another probably unprecedented topic on an election like this, it's, for example, the relevance of conspiracy theories and conspiracy thinking. Some analysts say that in the end, this is much overstated, that in the end, really not so many people pay attention to this kind of stuff, but there is also some other point of view that they are much more pervasive than one could think, and especially not only about this election, but also about the future of democratic debate. What do you think about this?
Well, I think conspiracy theories are out there, and people go to conspiracy theories that they agree with. To a certain extent, there are a lot on the far right. QAnon, Q is in reference to, you have top secret, you have Q clearance in the federal government, and anon means anonymous. QAnon comes up with crazy things that people agree with and go to, but very few people. I think that the intervention by Russia and Iran right now reinforces racial tensions in the United States. I don't think it has that much impact on the outcome of the election, but it certainly has an impact on the quality and nature of the dialogue and discussion that we have in the United States about policy. It's quite extreme. We have people on the far left that believe in conspiracies also, and it really undermines government. And democracy is a fragile thing. If you continue to criticize government, and that there are all these elites in government that are trying to take freedom away from you, and it's terrible, then it's very hard to govern. In the state of Washington, there's a very good governor with respect to the pandemic. He's been great, and the spike here is not as great as elsewhere. Governor Inslee, and people on the far right in the state, there are very few of them, and they're in the eastern part of the state, not around Seattle or the west. They're criticizing him as being a king and taking freedom away from them, and that they shouldn't be required to wear masks. And in areas where they weren't wearing masks in the state, there are spikes now. So it is related to your question in the sense that they look at him as, in a conspiracy of taking away the freedom to have their businesses open. They're failing their freedom personally, and that it's all part of a plan. It is not. It's part of a plan to reduce the exposure to COVID and try to deal with a health crisis. Yes, it's worse than it ever has been in American politics in modern times. Of course, we've had conspiracy theories before World War II, before World War I, all kinds of other times. But this time, it's quite bad in modern history of the United States.
By the way, I've just seen a breaking news that the Dow Jones is falling 600 points today at opening. So
because of what I said.
Exactly. So this really seems to be, a matter of concern at the moment. But I see that we have a few questions from the audience already. So, Paola, what questions are arriving from our public?
Thank you, Pierre Luigi.
Okay, so I hope you can see me and hear me.
We can see you. We can hear you.
So let's start with the first one. Is there a statistical correlation between the political choice and the level of education? taking a look at the democratic states, for example, California and Massachusetts, well known for their universities, for example, Stanford or Harvard, and they are groundbreaking states.
So I don't know about Harvard. I say that because Dr. Sacco is from Harvard. Yes, there's a clear relationship between the level of education and the probability of people voting in this election. People who have higher education, they have college education, are more likely to vote for the Democratic Party. People who do not have college and less are more likely to vote for Trump. Now, to go to the state level, there are other variables that are more important in a model. It's education, but it's also, if you take Massachusetts, California, Oregon, and Washington, there are other variables besides education that drive people to be democratic in those areas. However, in the rural areas in the United States, there are fewer people with higher education. That's one of the problems of rural areas, is that people are losing their children. They're leaving those areas. They're going to places like Seattle to get jobs, and they're leaving South Dakota, North Dakota, and it hurts. There are lower levels of education. They're more likely to vote for Republicans in those areas. Hope that answered your question. Pierluigi, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, there is one point that I think is interesting. We are transitioning towards a knowledge economy. So clearly the future looks like the people with education, certain minimal level of educational degrees are in some sense, of course, driving not only the change, but even the momentum of future societies and economies. What does this mean, for example, for the future scenarios of political consensus in the US, in your view?
So that's absolutely right. And there's a threat to the people who do not have those advanced degrees, people who are barely making it in South Dakota on a small farm, and they don't have an advanced degree. And they look at these people that are in Seattle, and they just do a little bit of programming, and they make 5 times as much as they do. And there's a bitterness, and populist arguments by Trump appeal to those people. There are not enough of them around to overcome the populations elsewhere, in my opinion. But yes, we have transitioned into a nation that is not an industrial nation as much as a information and creation, where what you do. Sorry, I'm stumbling here. What you do on the internet, how you sell things, how you create things, is more important than raising cattle or building something. The building of something is elsewhere in the United States, even though Trump has tried to stop that. It's in Mexico, it's in China, it's in Vietnam, but the creation is from here to a great extent, and that's how we stay ahead. And so that's very hard for people to accept if you don't have a lot of education and you have elites telling you what you should do. They get kind of angry about it. I think that probably goes on in Italy, between southern Italy and northern Italy to a certain extent. You have that political division and tension there also.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that probably also some self-criticism, for example, for Silicon Valley guys from this point of view is in order, because in the end, it's true that they created an enormous amount of wealth, but also they exacerbated inequality rather than contributing to curbing inequality. And in the end, it's the inequality problem that is in some sense, the phantom in the house here, because clearly, I mean, what you're also implicitly saying is this, that the long shadow of inequality and long-run consequences of this is fueling rage, for example, for the people who feel excluded. What do you think?
Yes, I think we have we've seen the data. We have a huge problem of maldistribution of wealth. Some people can become very wealthy in this new economy, and a whole lot of other people are losing net worth. They're losing income, and especially during this COVID period, it's really hit people hard. but it was going on for a long time. And our tax code reinforced that. Certainly this new tax bill that was passed 2 years ago by the Republicans reinforced it. And it causes rage. It causes people to get angry. They're working 1, 2 jobs, 2 people in the family, working more than 1 job just to stay ahead. And they're one illness away from poverty sometimes. And so these candidates are trying to address that. Biden is with respect to healthcare reform, but also tax reform. Trump is not that interested in it. He uses the stock market as a measure of how well the economy is going, and that's not the whole measure. That's not the right measure, in my opinion. We need to do more about maldistribution of wealth, have more equality among our individuals. And so Biden is pushing for a $15 minimum wage. It is $6.75 minimum wage at the federal level, and in some states it's higher. Seattle says that the minimum wage there next year will be $15. That helps bring people along, and the Republicans criticize that. They said it will kill the economy, and Trump has also.
Of course. Paula, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have other 2 questions. So the first one is, what are the possibilities of election manipulations and foreign influences? What would happen if President Trump, being defeated, disagreed to relinquish power peacefully?
Good question. I'm worried about that. President Obama yesterday had a terrific, he's very, very good speaker, a terrific speech in Florida yesterday. He said, this guy, meaning Trump, brags about the fact that Xi from China and Putin from Russia and the leader of Korea are all for him. He says, of course they're for him. We've given them all kinds of things, and there's a manipulation going on, according to our intelligence community, by Russia right now. And yet the president thinks that there will be manipulation by the Democrats and on the left, and he's questioning this election already. I think he thinks he's going to lose, and he's not saying anything about foreign manipulation, foreign intervention, which happened in 2016. It's happening again now. It's happening in your nations. It's happening in Italy. He's not saying anything about it. Biden is. I am worried about what will happen. As I mentioned before, we touched on this earlier. What will happen if the election is exceedingly close? It's going to be tough. I'm worried about the president. I mean, he's unhinged frequently in terms of his logic and what he says. There's no discipline, and I'm worried. I'm very worried about that. Pierluigi, what do you think?
Well, yeah, it's difficult to dissent from this because it is already sending so many signals to his electoral base in this particular sense. But let's for a moment move from this grim scenario. Let's imagine that actually Trump loses and that there is somehow a transition to a new order. What do you think will be the future of the Republican Party if Trump loses? Because this is also one of the big scenarios, question marks on future scenarios.
Good question. I think behind the scenes right now, many Republicans are manipulating to try to move the party away from Trump. Trump's not a Republican. He wasn't a Republican. It's all about his ego. It's all about, what he wants. And so they're moving away from him. They think that he's going to lose. They think they're going to lose the Senate. Privately, they're saying that, and many positions at the state level. They need to rebuild the party. I personally think in a democracy, we need strong parties. But their party is broken right now. We have the Lincoln Project in the United States, which has produced some fabulous advertisements that are it's made up of Republicans, and Republicans that are supporting Biden because they have the philosophy that we need to just wipe out the Republican Party and start over. So they want to start over and have a more moderate party. I think that Biden, if he's elected, will reach out and try to work with the moderates. But I think the Republican Party will go back to their conservative position on fiscal responsibility, on debt and deficit, monetary policy. They will be worried about too many regulations, but they still know that they need them. And it will be restructured. So Nikki Haley is being touted as a person that's the new potential nominee already for the next election, and she's much more moderate person. You need to reach out to minorities, as George W. Bush tried to do with McCain with their immigration bill. They missed by one vote of having that bill passed, but they both agreed that you have to reach out to Latinos in America who are pretty conservative on a variety of issues, and other immigrants if they're going to survive. So the party has to change. Even if Trump wins, it has to change. And I think it will be tough. The Democrats have a problem also, though, that we have a very strong progressive wing with AOC, people on the progressive side that are pushing him now to do things that I think he's going to slow things down. He's going to appoint people that look like America, he says, women, minorities, but that are more moderate and in the middle. His philosophy, his ideology doesn't solve problems. We've got to be more pragmatic, and I think he's going to approach it that way. But he will have problems governing because of splits in the Democratic Party also.
And in terms of problems of future government, of course, another big issue is the Supreme Court, of course. And now, in an unprecedented move, as we know, there has been this confirmation just the day before the election, literally, of a new judge of the Supreme Court. Do you think that the Democrats at this point will breach the convention of keeping the composition of the Supreme Court as it was so far in terms of number of jurors, or do you think that at this point there could be even a breach of this tradition?
I don't know. I think that Biden is being very careful about that. He said he wants to see what happens after the election. And he, I think, rightfully doesn't discuss expansion of the court to 11 seats, which is being discussed by some people on the far left. It is a court that will be conservative for a very long time because the latest Supreme Court Justice Bennett is 48 years old. She could be on there for another 40 years. She's even more conservative than the most conservative people on the court at this point. So the court is really changed. Now the court, in terms of its size, has changed about 5 different times. There are times that we had as many as 12 and fewer than 9, which we have right now. So it's not unprecedented, and all you need is a majority vote in Congress and the president signing it. Now I think there would be probably a pretty negative reaction to that, but I'm not sure of that. The one thing that I know Biden will do is he will nominate people to the judicial system at a lower level that are more moderate, maybe even progressive. The Republicans have put in over 175 people that are pretty conservative, pretty young, and the ABA, the American Bar Association, say that they're incompetent. They're not that experienced. So that has to change. He will try to change that as those positions become open. But it is an issue, especially for Republicans now. They want to continue Trump as president, even though they disagree with his personal behavior because of the court.
And I think we have the space for one last question from the audience. Paula.
Yes, so since Trump's policy is based on deregulation, is he willing to eliminate Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act as far as Wall Street is concerned, allowing bailouts?
Good question. Dodd-Frank is the name of the major reform that occurred after the 2008 crash economically in the United States, and it was the re-regulation of banks. I think that Trump is willing to continue to deregulate in that area, especially in the case of defining derivatives and regulation of derivatives. We're getting a little echo. Hello, I don't know where it's coming from. Maybe it's me. I don't know. No, that did it. Anyway, I think that Trump will continue to push for deregulation. It's a large, complex act. All of the regulations haven't even been promulgated for the act yet. After all of these years, there's still more being considered. Biden, on the other hand, is knows the act well, knows what happened in 2008, and will continue to watch the banks. They're beginning to misbehave in some cases, giving loans to people that shouldn't have loans, and he will reinforce the act. But it will not be a major issue that he will push immediately. He'll be pushing for dealing with COVID, dealing with the economy, and dealing with racial justice, and dealing with global warming and environmental regulation. He will re-regulate. But in terms of Dodd-Frank, I don't see it as a major issue for reform by Biden at this point. Trump will continue to go in the line of deregulation.
Thank you, Jim. I think it was really a terrific dialogue, and you really opened up so many perspectives. I'm personally really stimulated by many in your comments to have some further reflection on the outcome of these American elections. Is there any final thought that you would like to share with our audience?
Professor, sorry, is there time for just one last question? Because
sure.
I think it's
I have time for more than one question.
Okay.
Depends on
Pierre. I think this is a really good one.
Sorry, Pierre.
So how do you think the relations of the US with Russia and China will evolve if Biden is elected?
Well, Biden's no fool when it comes to knowing the individuals in these countries and knowing the relationships with the countries. I think that Biden, one of the reasons Putin doesn't want Biden is he'll be tough on Russia in terms of what their intervention into our election, but tough on Russia with respect to the war that continues to go on in the Ukraine, and in terms of the threat to Lithuania, which in the United States, we don't hear a lot about it, but it's there. I was in Lithuania, and they are very worried about Putin and incursions into Lithuania. He will continue to put pressure on Russia to change its behavior there, but also in elsewhere in the world, in Syria. China, I think he will go back to the so-called TPP, which was 11 nations that got together. We led those nations to have a trade agreement that would help Asian countries and help them compete with China. He would be realistic about China in terms of its role in the world economically. He wouldn't roll over, and he would compete with them on the trade side, not through tariffs, but through this collection of other nations, if they'll have us at this point, because they went ahead without us, with Japan and others. And so trade is the major issue there. I think he's also very concerned about the South China Sea and about these platforms that they've built for military purposes on small atolls or small islands in the South China Sea. He will continue to want to make sure that we have open shipping and open air corridors in the South China Sea. It's a very complex question. There are many other issues than the ones that I've addressed. I would end, and then I would have Pierre Luigi add to this. he would support NATO and go back to multilateral relationships in terms of military, but also trade. And he would not go after our allies and embrace those who we're competing with, like Russia and China. Pierluigi, could you add to this? I'm sure you know much more than I do.
Well, I think that the multilateral global order that is prevailing today is very difficult to decipher because, of course, it's probably one of the most complex global scenarios certainly in the post-war era. Nevertheless, I think that there is a clear interest for example, not only from the European point of view, but honestly, I think also from the American point of view, seen from an outsider perspective, in terms of reinforcing the strategic alliance with Europe, because clearly in a moment like this, the US are losing some of the strongest levers of their soft power, for example. And this is a major issue because clearly the place of the US in the global imaginary is quickly changing and is moving to the borders, so to speak. And from this point of view, I think that rejuvenating this alliance could really be strategic, not only for Europe, but also for the US. It's interesting to understand, though, what will be at this point, the evolution of the multilateral relationships between the Western Bloc, if newly reconstituted, and Russia and China. And of course, all the emerging powers like India that we should not forget from this point of view.
Right.
So I think that, it's very, very difficult to make prediction at this time. But this is also one of the reasons why, more than ever, I think that these elections will determine not only the future of the US, but certainly the future of Europe, and especially what will be the grip, for example, of populist movements in Europe in the next few years. Because clearly, a new populist wave from the US could really be quintessential to the survival of certain types of movement in Europe, whereas a new, let's say, Biden rule would probably also mark the end of most of the cycle, also from the electoral point of view, of certain populist movements in Europe. So let's all cross fingers about this. Is there any further question from the audience, Paula? No? So is there any final remarks you would like to add, Jane?
Well, just one thing, that everyone thinks that each election is the most important election in their generation. This one is. It's a real threat to our democracy at this point. And I think that people are highly motivated to come out and vote because of that. They measure this in polls, and it's in the 80 percentile that people think this is an important election. And I think that most people in the United States would like to have this thing over with right now. There's a great deal of agony and worry. It is an important election. I believe that the people's views will eventually come out, and we will have change. And we will go back to what we've had for 70 years with Europe, and continue a relationship there that is positive and not conflictual. And thank you very much to everyone who's listening. Pierluigi, it's been great working with you. And Roberto, thank you for inviting me to be here. And Paolo, thank you very much. Good to see you again. Hopefully we'll see you in the spring.
Hopefully,
I think we've been doing work with you for 13 years now in the spring. And so hopefully we can do it again. Right.
Absolutely. We're all looking forward, and finger crossed. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you, Jim. It's been really fantastic.
It's been a privilege to do it. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.